Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight, our agenda includes public audience because we are considering several supplemental appropriations. We'll be reviewing year-end financial results, staff proposed transfers, first quarterly report, then we'll be having a budget discussion, approval of the minutes, and finally an executive session at the end of the evening to review a sale or purchase of real property pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes 1-260. We will begin with public audience, and we invite members to speak for up to 3 minutes. Joan.
Joan Cole, 26 Whitcomb Drive. These are my comments, and I feel that this should be looked into. I would like to have the Board of Finance review all the support services delivered to the students by the Board of Education to determine whether using case-by-case consultants would reduce benefits and longevity costs while providing the appropriate professional services. The Board of Finance should review all the tax abatements and exemptions given to businesses and farms to determine whether reducing their tax burden adds any value to the viability of the business and replace them on the tax rolls. There should be an effort to have a zero-based budget with all programs on the table for review. The Recreation Department budget has had deficits over the years. This should be reviewed. The Board of Education non-lapsing account should be reviewed for allocation of these funds. The increased tax burden on taxpayers and the high mill rate has made Simsbury non-competitive in the marketplace. All the rental apartments competing with housing ownership will reduce the value of the housing market. It is the duty of the Board of Finance to give direction to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education to reduce expenditures while delivering cost-effective budgets to the taxpayers. Thank you, and all my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Co. Words of wisdom.
Thanks, Joan.
Thank you for listening.
Lori?
Well done, Joan. I am Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road. Since last year's budget, I've been taking a much closer look and deep dive into what people we hire and elect to represent us spend our resident taxpayer money on. As you know, the government, the town, really has no money other than what they force us to spend of ours. Other than one vote each of us has absolutely no say in the matter other than to come here in front of town boards. At 10% of my gross annual income, my Simsbury property tax on my extremely modest 1,800 square foot home in town that I've owned for over 25 years is the single biggest line item in my personal budget after income tax. Thanks to recent tax increases, my property tax payment is bigger than the principal and interest payment on my mortgage. Think about that. My taxes are more than my mortgage alone for my single biggest asset. I am forced to pay more every single year for the operation of this town than I am required to invest in ownership of my own property. In addition, property tax is a tax on unrealized gain. If someone renovates their home, they are taxed on the new higher value after they were already taxed on the income earned that allowed them to complete the renovations in the first place. If property values go up, we are taxed on the new higher value of our home, yet we would have to actually sell it to reap the profits to have the money to pay the higher taxes. This completely defies logic. A home I purchased over 25 years ago is no longer affordable to live in because the taxes have gone up exponentially while I've been working away year in and year out to pay off the principal of my home to get rid of my mortgage payment. What this means is I never really own my own home. The town government effectively does. But from a practical perspective, I'm here to impress upon you the absolute need to not only tell the various boards that there will be no tax increases this year, but to tell them it is beyond time to cut their budgets, to stop frivolously and dismissively spending our money. Over the coming months, I will point out more indiscriminate spending, but in advance of your guidance, I'd like to point out some representative examples of what is going on. I assure you most of us would never tolerate this were it happening in our own households. In no particular order, the Library Board of Trustees Finance report, Library Director Lisa Maselli reported that the library anticipated ending the year with $20,000 in savings and asked all of the departments to do a technology survey of their staff's equipment to determine the need for replacement. They decided they would most likely put some of the funds toward ebooks. They were actively looking for things to spend their extra money on. I've created a 10-year spreadsheet on the Social Services Department, which I'll share with this board at some point. While it's not the biggest budget in town, most people insist on generously funding them because of the compassion for those less fortunate. My analysis of actual budget figures shows that 85% of the social services budget is spent on salaries. Lastly, I'm going to cut to the bottom and point out something just scratching the surface at the Board of Ed. Amy's going to tell you how the Board of Ed came in under budget this year. What you may not readily notice is that we would have had an additional $77,000 surplus if we didn't lose our federal funding for our nutrition director position because Simsbury Schools hired an employee who didn't meet the federal hiring requirements for that position.
Right, if you could wrap it up.
Okay. We will continue spending that $77,000 until those requirements are met, and that's not okay. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Just a couple quick updates from board members. First, I sent an email around. We saw that the Social Security COLA is 2.5% this year, so that is one of our marks that we look for. That's an average increase to seniors and those living on disability about $50 a month that they will have extra to spend. I'll open it up. Mike, do you have any housing updates at this point?
On the Housing Policy Board, we continue to work through the 54 policies, and we're whittling that down, and the next meeting is on November 6th.
Great. Todd, we haven't had a retirement
No,
subcommittee,
they're,
but
like gave an update last time we had a meeting with the advisors, but nothing since then.
okay. And Art, we're still good on investments, I assume.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone else? Or okay. All right, then we will begin with the finance director's report. You'll notice that it includes a summary of the quarterly pooled investments that we make, and that is required by our policy guide. And often in the past, we hadn't had a lot of investments, so now we do have a few, so there's a minor report on that. So Amy, thank you for your work on that, and why don't you just walk us through what you have.
So I don't really have much. I think most of this is the same since the last time that we met. All the supplemental appropriations are listed for fiscal year 25. I think since the last time, the only one that was added was the Axon contract for $14,000. We have a couple of grants that are still pending. Our state and local cybersecurity grant, and then the state of Connecticut early voting grant. And then, like you had said, we just added a new section to report out monthly on how our investments are doing.
Hey, Amy, can I ask you a question about that quickly? On page 3, it shows the investments, if I'm looking at it right, and it shows the maturity dates. It shows both CDs as having the same maturity date. I had remembered, I think one was a 6-month and one was a 3-month or something like that.
Yeah, good catch.
Okay.
You're right. One's 6 months and one's 3 months.
No big deal, I just wanted to make sure I was remembering it correctly.
No, I didn't catch it. Good catch.
We'll move on then to the town fiscal year 23-24 year-end fiscal financial results. Those are found on page 3 through 67 of our books. You'll notice there are and you may not have noticed if you're the public, but Amy gives the line item details of all those beginning on page
47, wasn't it?
47.
What?
Which breaks down each department by their individual amounts, which is really helpful, Wendy, as you begin planning your budget, you can sort of see where the savings were, where the overages are. It's a great planning document for the budget. So why don't you walk us through what you have?
Sure. So just starting on the overall, we had an overall surplus of about 5.9 million. And instead of taking you through the individual line items, which I take you through with my projections, I'm just gonna take you through, bless you. I'm just gonna take you through how the final ended compared to my projections. So starting with, bless you. I'm already sick, come sit over here. So on the revenue side, we had a final surplus of about 3.9 million. The last time I reported out, I had projections of about 3.3 million. So an increase compared to projections of about 500,000. The line items that make up this $500,000 difference is in the finance department, our investment income came in about 173,000 more than anticipated. The building department had additional $63,000 in permits. The town clerk had an additional $71,000 in conveyance tax, and then the Board of Ed ended with some good building rental income and some tuition receivables of about $200,690. So that's the difference from where we had projected compared to where we ended on our revenues.
How is it that the rental income would come as a surprise?
Mostly because they're renting it throughout the year, even into June, we'll get the receipts in July. So when we do our year end, we're looking at July receipts and putting them back into.
So it's a matter of the Board of Ed reporting to the finance department.
Amy, for members of the public, we budgeted conservatively on investment income for 2024. In 2025, we budgeted a lot less conservatively, so we won't have that excess
Right.
type of excess revenue there. The other thing that happened that we might not have is we had the municipal revenue sharing grant that we've been told is unlikely this year, and we were also told not to budget for it because there was an uncertain. So right there, that's almost 3 million, 2.27 of it that will not likely be there. Maybe it will be, but
Who knows? Maybe.
Right.
But it's not planned for, no.
right.
Anything else on the revenue? No. Okay. Down to the expenditures, we had a final surplus, or we came in under budget, I'm sorry, by about a little over $2 million. My projections were at about 922,000. The majority of this is the Board of Education, where we had planned for a $500,000 deficit. And we had talked about at the last meeting why that did not come to fruition. So we had a zero on that line item. They did have a surplus, but if you recall, they transferred that money into their non-lapsing fund. Therefore, they came in with a net zero. The debt, this was an oversight on my part. We knew about this when we did the issuance, that we were gonna have the savings of 256,000. I had reported that out when we did the issuance, but never translated it into our expenditure report. And then the staffing and benefits for the police department came in higher than, or under budget more than anticipated. The police department had 2 new hires that were supposed to come on board. And I'm not sure what happened, if it was timing or if they just didn't end up coming on board, but I had planned for 2 additional staffing, and that did not come to fruition.
Mark, is the police fully staffed right now?
Yes, except for a couple of medical situations, yes. We didn't fill that records clerk position yet, because the build out hasn't started downstairs yet. So there's some savings there.
Questions on the expenditure report?
Savings or deferred expense?
If we don't fill it at all,
You
I'd say it's savings.
Amy, one thing that may strike people as odd if they look at it, first of all, let me thank Amy. I gave her a series of questions earlier in the day and she answered all of them. So the questions I'm asking now are really for the public's benefit. The Housing Authority is showing we received an additional 18,000 more in revenue, but that's not we didn't actually ask more of them. Can you
No, it
explain
was just a
that?
timing of a receivable.
So
So those are on the,
I think
any other on the
I
expenditure?
think I might be getting the years. So the numbers you just gave were for year ending 24.
Right, yes.
So the early voting on a 25,000 contingency has nothing to do with the grant that's still
No.
pending. It's different.
It's not
years.
related to the grant, right?
I think they were anticipating a summer primary that did not happen, so they were able to realize some of that savings then. We do have a contingency for elections this year, about 5,000. But they also budgeted for multiple primaries and the presidential this year with early voting, so their budget had a big increase
Right.
to reflect that. So less contingency needed because we budgeted.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else?
Do you wanna go on to capital?
Oh, sure. Is everybody else good with the rest of the funds? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, going on to the capital schedule, which is on page 63. You'll see that there are some projects that are ready for completion that are going to be closed out. The sewer fund projects, nothing new here compared to when we last reported out. The town projects, the $700 deficit, this is something that we did during the budget process where we were going to transfer $11,000 from savings in this budget to another project. The multi-use trail project that is showing an overage of $135,000, we are getting a reimbursement from Bloomfield on this project, around $150,000, so that may go up a little bit, but once they give us the reimbursement, we will be back down to zero. The highway pavement management for $67,000. So this is just a department oversight, just not understanding the accounting rules. When our superintendent conducted his paving schedule, he had done it so that the invoices would be in fiscal year 25. Not understanding that fiscal year 25 is when it's invoiced and when it's actually paid, but it goes based on when the actual work is done. So I had to put it back into fiscal year 24, showing an overage. So I let him know it does not go based on the invoice date, it goes based on the actual dates of service. So we should be good going forward on that one. The radio system upgrade, we can close out, that's neutral. And then there was one more town project, the public works replacement truck is getting closed out. The education project, so a good update here, the state has finally been in the process of closing out all of our old projects. So this has been great. We are going through the various stages of the closeout with the state. They have been giving us interim payments for the projects in anticipation of closeout. And a couple of them we're just waiting for our final proof of audit where they said we're done, we're closed, and then they'll issue us our final payment. And then we're also doing the internal review on what the state has audited to make sure we're in agreement with them. So a lot of those projects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 should be closed out relatively soon.
And those monies are showing some overage. Do those then go into our fund, or these are amounts that haven't been bonded?
Well, so these are all under budget, and I think most of them are bond funds, so they'll have to go into another project.
But we have that money in hand. That's money we have in hand.
Yes, so there's money that we have on hand for the bond portion, and then the final grant payments from the state are coming in. We've seen a lot of them actually.
So the one they aren't working on is the Latimer Lane for 4 million?
No, actually they are, so
Okay.
this one, because we waited so long on the other ones, we had talked to our contractor, I believe, or our owner's rep, I forgot who's doing it for us, but they actually took on the submissions for us. I think it's every 2 weeks or something they submit to the state, so we get reimbursement. So that's been a huge help this year,
So that will give some additional dollars for school projects, if there are any.
if there's
or-
savings.
Okay. When will we have those, numbers for the 2026 budget, do you think? We'll have some of them?
We'll have some of them.
That's finally some good news.
Yes.
The one thing I do wanna congratulate both Amy and Mark on is this is like one of the first times we've come in with no overages except for the minor accounting issue and highway pavement management, so great job in getting that tightened up. We worked for many months on that policy. Everybody's now rowing in the same direction, so congratulations on that. And thank you to staff for working with us, that's great. Great job. Great. Couple of other things, WPCA, we're working with council. It may be that the WPCA board is in charge of those appropriations. It's not clear, so we're gonna get some clarification on that.
Do that one again.
So that's to watch on that. And then I did ask Amy about some older projects that are now being closed out. This town facilities master plan from 2018 is gonna be closed out. Zoning regulations are gonna be closed out, working with that. So we're starting to clean up some of the older projects and get those completed. So again, thank you to staff and management for getting those moving. It's hard to have something from 2018 sitting in the books. All right,
Is there any news on the Henry James audit?
It's in progress.
It's in progress.
Listen, that's
better than it was.
That's better than
Yeah,
what it
way
was.
better than what it's been for
It was
years,
not
so
in
I'll
progress
take it.
before, it was just sitting.
and we skipped over special revenue funds. Special revenue funds, you'll remember from members of the public, we did budget some of those numbers, the full amount that was in the fund, so they don't have to come back to us and ask for dollars that they wanna spend. And special revenue funds cannot be overspent above what is in the fund. There's no like loaning process. And we do have two that are, or one that was fields and rec, but that's a timing on when we get that reimbursement. Do we anticipate that will be whole?
Yes. Yeah, I talked to the Parks and Rec director on that one, just to make sure he's aware. And when the funds come in, he's not able to utilize that fund until it's back in a positive position.
Give everyone a second to take a look at the special revenue funds and see if they have them. We do have 54, we've been trying to get them down. We did close out, I think we
Got
closed,
rid of one.
we did close out the Simsbury, that should be
Too
closed.
soon.
So that will continue to be a challenge for us, but those are also cleaned up after the policy, so thank you to Amy. For those who haven't been with us for the last 5 years, that was there to get a handle on. For those who have been with us, we watched us struggle to figure out who's in charge of the funds, who has access to the funds, what are the restrictions on the funds, and I think we finally now have a good system in place, and it's been reviewed by council and he agrees, so going forward, we have a good system in place there. So great job for everyone. Any questions on special revenue funds? And where are we going to next?
Board of Ed quarterly or year end.
We go to the Board of Ed fiscal year end results.
So I won't touch base on anything related to the revenue and the grants, that's all stuff that we've talked about before. But if you go to page 69, we talked about this briefly the last time we met with the overage and the insurance line, creating some savings. Our out of district tuition came in just shy of a $600,000 deficit like we had spoken about. Same thing with the people transportation, about a $530,000 deficit. So all of those things came to fruition as we had discussed at prior meetings. The one thing I did want to touch on, which Lori had touched on, is our food services. We had an audit done this year from the state of Connecticut and the USDA. on our food services program from start to finish, not only financial in the schools, how many ounces of peaches is going out to the students, things of that nature. So they looked at the program from start to finish. Our food services director does not meet the education requirements for the state of Connecticut. She does for the federal, which is ironic. We went back and forth with the state to see if they would give us some leeway in following federal standards. They declined. So we cannot charge her salary until those education requirements are met. So she has been kind enough to go back to school to get those education requirements, and then we can charge her salary back to the food services fund. However, that $86,000 we had to eat this year. This happened at the end of the year. We didn't really have time to maneuver. If you read the food services booklet, if you will, and all the rules and what can be charged to the fund and what can't be charged to the fund, we did find some things that we're not charging to the fund that we can do on a square footage basis that we are now going to charge the fund to recoup that $80,000. So it is going to be a net zero.
Good job.
And in the future, an even better return
Yes.
once we get those education requirements met.
Right. So we are trying to find a way to neutralize that, so we are not eating that salary. So aside from that, we ended up with a surplus of about $551,000. And like we had already talked about at the last meeting, that was put into the non-lapsing fund for future use.
And just when we do quarterly reports, can you just add a summary of the non-lapsing fund to our,
It's there.
never mind.
It's in there for you.
Page 71.
And as expenditures out of that will be public, they'll have to be done at a public meeting of the Board of Ed, right? Board of Ed has to authorize those expenditures.
Correct.
Okay. Just see if I can-
Still trying to get in my head around. Like for a while, we were talking about them coming in over budget by $500,000, and they were able to come in under by $500,000. It's a big swing.
Oh, were you not here for the last meeting, maybe? Oh, you weren't here for the last meeting. So we had a health insurance savings of about 1.1 million. So part of that, we had built in a cushion for a cliff that we had anticipated that did not come to fruition. We had, let me think, hold on. I think there was like $1 million worth of coverage that came off the books. I'm trying to think back to last month, and only about $400,000 worth of coverage that came on the books. So we had a lot of retirees with family plans that were replaced by single plan employees.
Gotcha.
And then we also had a surprise with our Munis conversion. So when we did our conversion, the way it used to go is that a part of our expenditures used to post to our liability account, and we would have to transfer it into our expenditure account based on our old system. Munis does it the right way, so we don't have to do that anymore.
Mhm.
So the projections that are coming up are actually really true projections.
Gotcha.
And I mentioned to Amy, the Board of Ed posts their budget online on their website, and those numbers are different than the numbers in the packet in some areas, and that was partially due to the transition.
Yeah, so that was something that our previous accountant had did when she created the accounts in Munis. I think they just fall into like the wrong category. And then there was there's a worksheet that we do that's posted online. Sorry, I'm sick. And that is generated by the bylaws of the Board of Education on what categories they have to use. So the two don't line up. So I told Lisa we'd fix that for next budget cycle so that they match.
Are we ready to move on to consideration of transfers and where we are? A couple of updates. During our budget process, we did make an assignment of $850,000 in April for the health insurance fund. And there are a few other assignments that we made during the budget process, one of which we are going to look for a supplemental appropriation. It was something we discussed during the budget. It was the pensions for cultural parks and rec. We knew it was coming, so we assigned those dollars in April, knowing that a supplemental would be asked for it in October. So that is on the books, but it doesn't show supplemental in here, so we'll have to just clean up how we accounted for it. But Amy and I just reviewed the minutes and they are in the minutes, so those we did it right. But why don't you walk us through what you have, Amy?
Sure.
And go slow, cause this is a little complicated.
So starting on page 74, this just gives you an overall breakdown of where our fund balance started, where our surpluses came in. You'll see the revenue has the budget variance at 3.9, and then the total expenditures and transfers have the coming in under budget of just over $2 million. So that's how you get to your 5.9. That leaves us with a fund balance of $25,105,061. And if you go down to that little chart down there, it says fund balance breakdown without doing any transfers. So you get your percentages of fund balance. So the non-spendable portion of your fund balance, that $159,804, is all of our prepaid expenditures. So we cannot touch that because we know that we're making payments on that in the next fiscal year. That's why it is considered not spendable. We have an assigned fund balance of $25,233. These are our open encumbrances at the end of the year. So essentially, these are purchase orders that have not been paid out until fiscal year 25. But the work was done in fiscal year 24, or started in 24 and then continued into 25. And that leaves us with an unassigned fund balance of $24,920,000, or 20.3% of fiscal year 25 expenditures.
Well, that fund balance will be a little different once we factor in the assignment of the $850 and the,
Did we do that from general fund or capital?
they did that from general fund, I think. Let me see.
I thought we meant to do it from capital.
And the general fund reserves.
Okay. So that'll be a little different after we factor in the
But we were gonna, if it wasn't there, we would have assigned it anyway, so it's okay.
we're gonna unassign it, right?
Well, you were gonna look into, check with the consultant, possibly unassign it if we were trending well enough, but I think it's probably too early to unassign it right now.
I think it's okay. We ended the year at 39% of expected claims in the health insurance fund, and we only need to be at 20 to 25%.
And how much did we use in the 2025 budget? We used a lot.
I think it was the $850. That's why we assigned it.
So you don't think we need it at this point?
I think we're okay.
So that's one thing that will then clean up this, but we'll have to take a motion to unassign if the board wants to do that, or we could do that at a later time. Give time to think about that.
You're talking about $850,000 that was assigned.
Mr. Wallace made a motion effective April 16, 2024 to assign $850,000 from the general fund reserves to offset the health insurance operating cliff in fiscal year 25-26. Mr. Burke seconded the motion, all were in favor, the motion passed unanimously. So we were gonna create a cliff in 2025. The concern was that come 2026, we'd have a huge spike in the cost of healthcare. If the numbers weren't looking good. And so the question is unassigning it right now too soon?
I mean, we can wait until the first round of health insurance estimates. But what we saved in claims this year, I don't foresee needing it, but we can wait until the tri-board.
It doesn't hurt anything to wait, right? Okay.
Yeah. All right, moving on to page 75, you'll.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but just to follow that briefing, has anything happened between Art's motion and today that makes it less likely that we're gonna need that money?
Yes, we thought that our budget for the health insurance was going to come in a lot higher with health insurance claims. I think we thought it was gonna be about $1 million higher.
You're talking about the experience of the past year. Okay, thank you.
You'll see at your place, I left you 2 stapled copies of papers. One is the closeout transfers request. So this is updated to an update to page 75 of your packet. It includes the Parks and Rec pension reimbursement that Lisa had mentioned that was assigned and now has to actually be transferred. So I had not included that on the original one. So if you wanna pull that up, I don't know if you've had a chance to look through the year-end requests from each of the departments. But happy to answer any questions or go through any of the items before we go down to the fund balance summary and how it impacts our bottom line.
I think just for the public, Amy, why don't you just briefly walk us through what the requests are and how much?
Sure. So we have a Ford computer and software system. So this is only $2,600. When one of our vehicles gets an error code or a check engine light code, we have to take it off-site to our dealer in order to read the code and to clear the code. So this software will allow us to do that in-house, so that we are no longer running back and forth with the vehicles to the dealer. So obviously this benefits highway, police, parks, and WPCA, all of our departments with vehicles. The additional budget mailer, this is something that we had talked about, I believe it was last year's budget timing, talking about getting a budget mailer out prior to the public hearing instead of after the public hearing so that we can try to generate some more resident feedback at the public hearing. The roof inspections was brought about by the Public Works Department. They want to do an overall analysis of their roofs to make sure there's no surprises or leaks. The library, additional part-time adult services staff. I believe Lisa brought some talking points related to that. Did you want to speak to that, Mark?
No, I'll get to it if there's any questions from the board. Go ahead.
Okay. Our AFSCME contract is finalized, its negotiation, so $14,000 for that. The telephone system upgrade. This was in our fiscal year 26 project. I guess the vendor needed to bump up the timeline. So instead of spending $25,000 in fiscal year 26, by doing it now, we'll only spend $15,000. I guess the door for the lower entrance at the library, I guess it's having issues and getting stuck. They would like to be able to fix that for $15,000. Simsbury Farms Park, tennis/pickleball replacements for the crack repairs. This is something that I think was put on last year and we had declined, and then the price has since increased. So in order to not get a higher price in the fiscal year 29 CNR plan, they're able to do it for $16,000 as opposed to a price increase over the next few years. The library furniture study, I'm not really fluent in that one, just more or less what's just written there for $18,000. Some signage, they wanted to do some rehab to the 2 signs that are coming into the town for $20,000. The MS4 industrial permits, this is something that is new per the state for updated permits for our facilities for Public Works, Parks, the landfill, and the WPCA. So these are new state permit requirements that we will need to fund. New website for about $40,000. An internal control audit, I think
The website, is that the fees for the service or that's the migration?
that's the migration. No, it says this does not include the actual cost of migration.
So where's that?
This must be the cost of the migration.
It is.
Yeah, it's the cost of the migration and then the annual fees were comparable year to year.
Okay,
I think that
yeah, I
was-
struggled reading that.
Yeah, that was
So
just
that's-
written poorly.
I'll just add, it does not include a component to the website redesign that would make it ADA compliant, which we've separated out, and we intend to put that into my next budget next year. So this, if approved, would allow us to get started. There'd be a little bit more cost on the back end.
I would think that the platform would handle that, wouldn't it?
Not the way they priced it, unfortunately. It's not all in one fell swoop.
Interesting.
The internal control audit, This is something I think I had brought up previously. So we're doing our fraud risk assessment, hopefully starting soon by the end of the year. And then on top of that, it's just good to have an internal control audit that goes per department, looks at all of their internal controls. And we'll give you a detailed analysis back on things that we can do better, tweaks that we need to make, things that need to be improved. And typically this is something, it's just good practice to get in to do like a couple departments every year for the internal control review. And it's typically part of your like a rolling CNR. So that's something that we had wanted to start. And then the police contract negotiations, and then the parks pension reimbursement, which Lisa already spoke about. So that gives us a remaining balance of about 4.6 million that can be transferred into the capital reserve. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see our new fund balance for the general fund. If all of those transfers are done, our unassigned fund balance will be that 19,647,223, and we're right around that 16% mark of 16% of expenditures. And we typically go 15 to 17% of expenditures. So I just picked 16% as that's where we've typically been. But you can change that in accordance with the policy anywhere between 15 to 17%.
We include the 850 assignment, that'll be about more like 15.5% reserves, right?
Let me look.
Just still within our policy range.
And we're buying the bougiest computer forward software, by the way. That's pretty pricey. I have the same app for my cars at home and it cost me a couple $100. And it does all the same stuff that one does, and I'm sure they're getting that one from who's the big trucks that drive around with all the Matco tools, Matco tools.
It brings you about to 15.3.
15.3, so it's still within policy. One of the things, the way the charter works, transfers can be done from existing appropriations to existing appropriations. Some of these are new projects, so there'll be supplemental appropriations. Those require the recommendation of 4 members of the Board of Selectmen. No matter how many members are at the meeting, if only 4 members are at the meeting, we still need 4 approvals. That's one of the few places in the charter where they do that. Interestingly, Mark pointed out, we do not need that. We only need the majority of those present, so that will probably be changed during charter review. It should be 4 and 4. I don't know why that is set up that way. We do not have recommendations from the Board of Selectmen at this point, so one option we have is to wait until they've done their review before we do it. The one thing, I'll restate what we've said many, many times. You don't want to do budgeting off budget cycle for the most part unless there's a true emergency for it, because while all these look great, they look great when we looked at the full slate of needs for next year in fiscal year 2026. We have generally not ever done anything that would increase the operating budget at year-end transfers, and I think that is wise because you don't know what's coming down the road and it's a commitment over time. We've generally never approved anything that was rejected in the budget. That doesn't make a lot of sense then to do it off budget cycle. If it's important to the Board of Selectmen, you'll put it in next year's budget if it was rejected in the current year budget. We generally don't do stuff unless there's an urgent need for public safety that was not known during the budget. And we have stated in the past as a group, and we don't do it unless it's a spend to save. By doing it now will enable us to save dollars in the future. And it's an essential need. But again, if it wasn't budgeted, why would we budget it now unless there's a really pressing need? And then the other thing I think about is just like when you have a home budget and you've got everything planned beautifully and the boiler breaks and it's $15,000 you're really planning on spend, you don't just spend it. You say, okay, whoops, instead of going to Hawaii, we're gonna go to Rhode Island for a long weekend. You adjust your budget to accommodate the unexpected. So I guess I have great reluctance, but I will open it up to members of the board to discuss. There are two things we should discuss, whether we wanna do it now or wait and do it after the Board of Selectmen has had an opportunity to review. As the charter recommends, we could, if we do approve it, it would be subject to the Board of Selectmen, but I think we would like to give them an opportunity to vet it. Tomorrow night, for example. And there are some things that, you know, it would be probably be helpful for them to know that we're hard no's or hard yeses on, but ordinarily you would do this before and then we would get it after. So it's no different than that. But I just wanted to open up to thoughts on.
Yeah, can we be clear as which items on the list are supplemental appropriations and which qualify as transfers,
So the Ford computer would be a sub.
right?
Budget mailer additional would be a sub.
Didn't we budget for the budget mail?
No, it was done after the budget had already been passed that it came up and but we had expressed an intention to do it with year-end savings. Roof inspections would again be supplemental appropriation, library part-time supplemental, ASME contract, that's an increase. We're legally obligated to fund that one. But we have to fund a contractual settlement. We could say to them, find savings in the current year, and if you can't, come back to us, but we have to pay that. Telephone system upgrade, that would be, again, a supplemental because it wasn't in the current. It's a spend to save though. Door to the lower entrance would be supplemental, Simsbury Farm supplemental, library furniture supplemental, signage supplemental, actually, they're looking like they're all supplementals. And 14, the new website supplemental, internal audit control, Amy did mention to me that that could be delayed as part of the budget. It has to be done, but it doesn't have to be done right now, so we can take that one off and do that during the budget cycle, so thank you for that, Amy. She can't get to it until very late spring anyway, so it's just a month delay. IBO contract, we do not need to do that as a supplemental appropriation. We can do an assignment in the general fund reserves because we don't have a final number, and Mark can come and Wendy can come back to us when they have a final number on negotiations. Park pension reimbursement, that is something that we discussed at the budget, that we assigned dollars for and expressed an intention to fund as a supplemental appropriation in October. So that one and the additional budget mailer we discussed publicly during the budget process as our intention to fund those two. You know, the telephone and the pickleball courts may be spend to saves, but I don't know if we have additional we have sufficient information on those two.
My inclination is to get the views of the policy board before we decide. I mean, that way we give them the opportunity to set their priorities and decide which of these are most important, and then we can make a judgment about how fiscally responsible they are.
I was just gonna say, I did have a choice to meet with a couple of members on the board, and kind of the going in position is similar in that if it's a required thing for safety or like the contracts, things like that. But I do know that the library furniture came up with the budget. We did not do anything related to that at the last budget, so I'm not sure why we would do it here. The part-time position, we have said we're not doing any hiring, so that would be probably a no. The door for the library, unless it's a safety risk, I'm just giving, I mean, I think we would probably be in line on a few of these. The website, we do wanna ask for a lot more questions because it's not clear what this includes, and if we're going to add Mark had told me about adding this other component, but if it's cheaper in the long run to do it all at once, to increase the website, and I'm just not sure what this includes. You know, we've talked about doing cleanup on the website, which we could continually do on a regular basis, but if this is a full replacement and what it includes. So those are questions we plan to ask tomorrow night, or I plan to ask tomorrow night. So that's kind of overview.
Yeah, I just don't, I would feel bad because I'm probably gonna say no to most of these.
I don't know if we're gonna say yes to most of them either, other than the ones that we know the contract related items. And the budget mailer, I do know we talked about, and the ones you just said that we agreed to at the last budget, which I didn't remember, but reminded me tonight, I'll be prepared tomorrow night to know that.
All right, so what are other members' thoughts about delaying and just giving the Board of Selectmen, let's hear from that and follow the normal charter process? Folks are comfortable with that?
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll table that for our, and if we need to do a special meeting, we can do a 8 AM meeting if the time becomes pressing at some point. Do a 9 AM meeting. All right, so we'll go ahead and table those. And then again, if something is pressing, we can meet earlier than that.
Just what's IBPO?
Police.
International Benevolent Protection.
I have no idea.
That's a good guess.
That was my guess.
Brotherhood.
Brotherhood.
Yes, brotherhood.
Police officer.
Okay, so can I have a motion to table until November or a special meeting can be set to consider general fund and capital transfers?
So
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Then we'll go into the town fiscal year 2024-2025 budget status report. That begins on page 84. If you wanna walk us through that, one of the things, Amy, we had asked at the last meeting, which Amy was able to accommodate, was adding the budgeted 24 and actual 24 numbers so that we could do a moment in time comparison, percentage-wise spent from last year to percentage-wise spent to this year, so that's really helpful. It enables us to notice any trends that are a little off or different. So Amy, why don't you walk us through what you have on the first quarterly report?
Sure. So as you know, the year-end projections for the first quarter are typically whatever the budget is, unless there's something different that I know about. There's just not enough data to develop a trend that I can work off of to develop the projections. So starting on page 86, one thing that we did see within the tax department is actually, let me step back. So the tax department has $100,000 in excess revenue. This is conservative, it'll likely be higher, but the reason that I did this conservatively is because I don't have that trend to go off of, and then we typically budget 98.5% collection rate, we're usually around 99%. If you looked at the year-end financial report under tax, when we were going through the year-end analysis and looking at our final numbers, our current year collections were only $100,000 over budget. That's way off from where we thought we were gonna be. We're usually around $700,000 in current year collections only. So I had Francine run the grand list and find out what happened. And she had budgeted about $5 million for certificates of correction. So those are changes to the grand list where people are granted reductions in their grand list value.
Because of appeals?
So we had budgeted $5 million for those certificates or appeals. The actual number for the certificates of correction came in about 20 million. And the majority of those were related to the reval and the appeals process.
The Board of Assessment Appeals made those changes.
Correct.
So we thought it would be 5 million, it came in at 20 million. It's about a $600,000 hit to our budget.
Correct.
So that was that will carry forward now for the next 5 years. So that's really a $3 million hit to our budget over the next 5 years.
Which underscores the value of being 98.5%.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's part of the reason we do that conservative, because some years it does come in quite a bit higher, but we've had years where it's come in like this before, and this enables us to accommodate it without the fear of running into a deficit. But that's a little.
It also underscores our interest in changing the company that's doing the revaluation.
So this is actually not related to the reval company or the reval, it's people that contest their valuation and then they can go in front of the Board of Assessment Appeals and ask for a reduction.
I'm giving the
But if
Board of
we-
Assessment Appeals the benefit of the doubt here.
Ideally, if we get someone who delivers better assessments, right?
Right.
Then there'd be fewer appeals, right?
Got it.
That's the logic I had at least.
So yeah, that one's hard to know. Is it the assessor or
Yeah.
was it the board that was very generous? I mean, one thing that would be interesting to do, I don't know if we can do that analysis, Mark, or Frank would be a perfect thing for Franklin, but to look at who asked for them, was it the high income that was asking and what range of relief were they given? Who was getting the bigger percentage relief? Just from an equity perspective, from the DEI, how are we? There have been some studies that show that those who are wealthier and have more means ask for the appeals and therefore get relief more. And those who have less do not ask and get less, so it ends up that the rich are, those with less income are subsidizing the high income. It would be interesting to see how that played out.
We'll check it out.
Thank you.
Well, if the assessed value was different, it just would have been a different grand list number, right? So I mean,
But they're questioning their individual assessments, so if you come in 700,000 and say, no, my house is worth 600,
Right.
you get that relief, that individual gets that relief, somebody else is gonna make up for it.
right, that's the 5 versus the 20.
That's the what?
Correct.
Right, but we had said, well, if is it the assessor, then I mean, then it would have been a different grand list number.
Well, you could look at it this way, there were likely more appeals than we anticipated.
Are you saying, Todd, we would have just made it up with the mill rate?
Well, I'm asking,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that we thought the assessments would be 5 million different, it was 20.
Yeah.
And somebody had said, well, maybe it was a bad assessment, and I'm saying, well, if the assessment was good, then it just would have been a different number in the grand list.
Well, the other
I see what you're
variable
saying.
We would
is
have
we had
known
a,
about it
Yes.
when we were setting the
Right,
budget.
no, I'm just
the
trying
other
to think
var-
about the geography of it.
Yeah.
the other variable is a lenient board of appeals where they granted more than normal, right?
Or
And
didn't?
there's so many different
No, I
potential
understand.
variables, right?
Trying to figure out the questions and
Yeah.
where that would
It would just be sort of interesting to dig a little bit deeper in there and see if there's any trends we should be aware of or cognizant of
Hmm.
going. And maybe there aren't, but because it's such a big variance, it's worth looking at. That was, yeah, we got a bunch of bad news actually today. That was one.
No, I got some good news. Our
Okay.
insurance refunds program through our insurance company has been reinstated and we got $24,000 this year instead of 0.
That's great.
That's karma?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I tried to help.
that's better than,
I'll take it.
Yeah, we were told not to expect that, right?
Exactly.
And
I'm actually
and they-
surprised they distributed it, but we'll
and we
take it.
didn't budget for that in this year's budget either, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's excess
Amy, some of the
revenue.
other towns are seeing their tax collections come in lower at a lower percentage because of the reval. Are we seeing any of that? Okay.
No, we are consistent from year to year. So that's all I have on revenues. And then expenditures, I don't really have anything, I don't think. Too early to tell on a lot of these. Any questions?
Can you just talk about the public works budget, prior year 16% spending, this year 26?
Where am I looking? Oh, yes. So that is the timing related to our transfers. So it's the public works vehicle, I think, and our paving, and there might be one more, where we transfer the money from the general fund into the capital fund in order to fund those projects. So last year it was done in the second quarter and this year it was done in the first quarter. So that's probably about like $500,000 difference.
And employee benefits is also big, and spending, is that because of vacancies or?
No, so. Let me look at that one. I thought I had looked at it earlier, but let me take a look at that one and get back to you.
And then just you had explained this to me and I've already forgotten, but why is transfer showing a deficit?
So that's just our contingency and our vacancy rate, so we budget for those two items, but we do not charge anything against them. So that $332 for contingency will be allocated amongst the departments as contracts settle. And then the $350,000, we just budget for that, but we don't charge anything against it, just so that we know any savings related to staffing in each of the departments is offset by that $350,000 first, so it technically doesn't count towards your bottom line.
Do you wanna take us into special revenue funds?
Sure. Simsbury Farms Fund, again, just in accordance with budget right now. You can ignore that fiscal note, which needs to go away. All of the fiscal notes there, I'll send out a revised on that one,
What page?
90. Again, nothing to trend right now, so just making sure everything is in accordance with budget. Our first quarter, obviously compared to budget, is a lot better, about $100,000. Revenues over expenditures, but we had budgeted for a slight deficit of $29,000. So at the moment, doing better than anticipated, but we'll have to see how the season plays out. Our health insurance fund, again, looking really good. Our claims going into this first quarter, 21% of budget, which is a little bit lower than last year, so our claims are still doing well. We have about 5.2 million in reserves, or 33% of expected claims. So not a bad place to be right now. The revenues are just timing as to when the payments get into the fund, so there's no issue there. Just timing of when the checks are deposited. Any questions on health insurance?
You've got both revenues down and expenditures down, is that just season?
Coincidence?
Coincidence, okay.
Rental property,
Mark, that has a huge reserve for a tiny budget. Could we, during budget season, can we get an idea from you what the plan is for that?
Will do.
Thank you.
we paid off that loan though, so that's exciting. Nothing really for any of the other funds, unless you have questions. I think we talked about the maintenance fund for the fields, again, in a negative position at the start of the year, but Parks and Rec Director is aware that he can't spend against that fund until it has a positive balance. I think that was it.
Any other questions on special revenue funds? One of the things that I find frustrating with fiducians, who I love, is you never know. We know how much our investments are, but I always get a sense of, well, what did we think our revenues were? What did we think our investments were gonna be? What did we think the budget was gonna be? And to actuals, like how much did we think employees were gonna contribute? How many did we think we were gonna give out? And we don't know. We always know what the fund balance is. I don't know if there's any way, if you could think about a budget, it may not be possible to do, but give that some thoughts, just so that we can say, this is what we thought it was gonna be. It's not an appropriated budget, so we certainly don't need to approve it, but it would be good to sort of know, oh, we thought employees were gonna pay this much. Town was gonna pay this much, we thought we'd make this much from interest, we thought we'd have to pay out this much, and here's what happened.
Got it.
Anything else on special revenue funds on, we were the law enforcement block grant and clean energy, Amy was gonna get us those later.
Yeah, nothing's changed on that in years.
Then go into capital.
Capital is pretty status quo. No overages, nothing of concern. So unless you have questions on specific projects, I don't really have anything major to report out.
There are two projects that lapsed. We have Meadows facility maintenance, 10,000 no spending, and town farm facility junk removal for 20,000. There's been no spending since May of 2021, so those have technically lapsed. Amy said she'd check with staff, and if there's a need for spending, we can anticipate a supplemental appropriation to reappropriate them. But if not, they'll remain lapsed. I did ask Amy, if you look in fiscal year 2023, we have about 500,000 where there's been no spending. In fiscal year 2024, we have similar amount that there's been no spending, about 500,000, and then no spending in 2025. So I did ask Amy to sort of look in as to what's going on there, and a lot of those are in progress. I know Wendy, you had talked about getting a capital update. I don't know if you guys are doing a capital, that's still your plan to get sort of status on capital, but going into the budget, it would be helpful to sort of see, like, why are we doing more capital if we haven't finished our existing capital? Does it make sense timing wise? Can those be delayed if but Amy was able to get answers and most of them are in progress at this point, so we will expect to see changes in the next probably 2 cycles.
It's quarterly, absolutely.
Okay. That was all I had. Does anyone have anything else in capital? Next, we have the Board of Ed quarterly report, and I wanna thank Amy for this. One of the things that's been frustrating for this board is sometimes we get the Board of Ed's quarterly report a month after the town, and it's very hard to reconcile an entire budget when you're looking at only half part of a budget. So that's been coordinated. Part of the reason for that is the Board of Ed created a finance subcommittee, which I think is a great development, and they met last Friday to review this, so that was an opportunity to do that. Just ask Amy if you could let us know when those agendas are out and if we can get copies of materials shared at those board. I didn't see it listed on their website, the agenda. The chair did send me some information, I can forward it to our board as well, but I think it would be good for us to at least know when those meetings are in case members want to attend or at least review agendas. But I think that's a great development on their part. So Amy, if you wanna walk us through what we're seeing right now.
So a lot of grants either in progress or we haven't gotten a reward, but the ones that have settled, there's nothing really significantly different with the exception of our open choice attendance and early learning grant. So this is for our choice students from Hartford that are tuitioned in. And we get $10,000 per student for the Hartford students that we have incoming. In order to get the $10,000 per student, we have to hit a threshold of 4% of our enrollment has to be to this Hartford students. So you'll see that this year there's a decrease of 116,000 compared to the prior year. And that is because we had 10 less kids this year compared to last year. So this is something that we are gonna keep an eye on during the budget process because we allocate our equipment there and we allocate some staffing salaries to this grant as well. So if that's gonna be a continued trend, we're gonna have to look at taking out some of those expenditures from that grant and finding other ways to pay for those items.
Is this because fewer kids are applying for the program?
I'm honestly not sure how we get the students that we get from Hartford. I can check with Neil and get back to you. He handles that program. But I think it's because the students have so many options, they're just choosing not to come here. They have magnet schools, they have other districts they can go to.
Who pays the $10,000, the Hartford Board of Education?
No, but they do reimburse, so the $10,000 comes from the state, and then anything above and beyond that, we charge back the city of Hartford, so those students are paid for. There's a zero bottom line to our budget. Good question.
Excuse me, is this the wetlands gonna be held here tonight? No.
The what?
This is the Board of Finance.
Conservation.
Yeah, okay,
There should be an agenda posted on the bulletin board right there that will tell you where it is.
okay, it was in here 2 weeks ago, so that's why I thought it was here. All right, thank you.
This is more fun.
The excess cost grant right below it, no preliminary estimates on this. We have a filing due on December 1st for our 10-1 activity as far as the students, the services they're being received, any tuition, education, things of that, not education, I'm sorry, transportation, things of that nature. So we will get our estimate probably around December or January for what we'll get for an excess cost reimbursement. As we talked about as part of the year end, one of the struggles that we've had is with our transportation, our outside transportation contracts for our special ed students, which is why we had a $500,000 deficit in that line item. So we are in talks with an outside transportation company to try to combine some of those runs that has capacity and see if we can do a multi-year contract to kind of get creative and get the cost down for us, not only for this year and for the out years. So more to come on that as we finalize negotiations.
Amy, how do you budget when you think about that? We get reimbursed, we're supposed to be reimbursed at what percent?
Oh, for excess cost? Well, what we're supposed to and what we actually get reimbursed at are two different things.
Right.
I think it's supposed to be around the 70% mark, and we usually end up getting 60-something reimbursement.
So that might be a good number to track.
We have it, I can get
Okay.
it for you, Melissa tracks it.
Okay, great. That's gonna be an important communication piece, I think, in the budget.
And then just moving on to expenditures, just a couple of things. So the food services, again, we expect that expenditure to be there for this year for the cost of the food services director. But again, we have been reviewing the manual that they sent over, and there are other things that can be reallocated to the nutrition services fund, so we'll be working on reallocating some of those dollars so it's cost neutral. The other thing I wanted to touch base on is operation of plant is there has been a huge increase in utility costs. So I am anticipating a memo coming from our public works director sooner rather than later, letting us know that we will likely be over budget in those line items. For example, WPCA, their electricity costs per month increased about 54%. So.
54%.
So
Is that Eversource?
you may have heard about it in the news.
Yep.
So we are being impacted from it as well. So Tom Roy is currently working on that for us. And that's pretty much all I have right now for the Board of Ed.
Questions? Okay, but we did get that 24,000 from Kerma, so.
We did. Everything helps.
All right, so we are actually on to budget discussion. As we enter the budget discussion, a couple of things, we ended 2024 very positive in revenue, almost 4 million in revenue. Town expenditures, we came in almost 1.7 under budget, debt service came in under budget, and school operating came in flat. So those are numbers that we'll be working on. The revenue numbers look a lot, and they were a lot, but those included the interest investment income, which this board, working with Art and the rest of our board and Amy, we budgeted that a lot less conservatively, so we will not see the 2 million windfall that we had last year. Those have all been budgeted and they were budgeted to reduce the mill rate. That's part of the reason we got that. And also remember with the revenue, just as a reminder to the public, municipal revenue sharing grant came in, about 700,000, we're anticipating that will be going. So those revenues are more if you exclude those. Okay, so Amy, why don't you pull up the budget modeling? We got some very sad news about the grand list. So we'll start right there. And anything you can do to make that like 800 times bigger.
Yes, I will. Just waiting for it to open.
And if you can just highlight 2026, the percentage there again. So we were hoping we'd come in higher, that 0.83% grand list growth. Instead, we are coming in at negative 1.29, which is a loss of about 1.4 million. Is that about right?
Yes.
So instead of looking at 900,000 new revenue, we're looking at a decrease of 1.4 million. So where we were to where we are is down over 2 million.
Is that a function of less growth than anticipated, or is it based on these appeals and changes to the assessed values?
I mean, it's a combination of everything. I can get some specifics from Francine as far as new projects that did or didn't come to fruition, but I know motor vehicle values are going down. State legislation made changes where we're losing money on the grand list, and then of course our own abatements and changes that we've done as well.
So we're seeing the transition, if you remember during the pandemic, car values shot way up and they're coming way down again, so it's coming back to earth, so we're losing that benefit. So all three are happening at the same time. You'll see next year, hopefully a positive, above average next year, and then about average the year after, and then it plummets again. So we're in for a little bit of a rough ride. Maybe it'll get.
So I think 29 is the reval year.
Is that the reval in 2029?
I think so. I'll double check. So that one's kind of hard to predict, but.
Yeah. So that's sobering. Amy, we had talked about as a board, our seniors, they're living with a 2.5% increase. What would the budgets look like given this grand list growth if we came in with a 2.5% tax increase?
So I built in the 2.5% as a part of a budget increase, not tax increase. So if we did it based on the budget increase, it would be a mill rate increase of 1.4 and a budget increase of 2.8. However, due to the lost in grand list, it'll be a tax increase of about 4.43.
So if we wanted to get the tax increase to 2.5, what would the budgets look like?
Honestly, let's see.
I think I talked with Mark, we're gonna need to do a brace for impact probably letter and explain to people well in advance of the budget. Wendy, you and Mark can work on that, explaining sort of the challenges, cause it's not looking great.
Yeah, I mean, what are the wage increases coming in from the union contracts? I mean, they're coming in at more than 2.5.
Yes, quite a bit more. Some of the highest we've seen actually in the history of, the last 15 years.
But those contracts are baking in wage increases that have happened over the last few years that their contract didn't get to enjoy, right? There was a contract in place where they had growth, but maybe it was at a slower rate than what has happened in the last couple of years.
There's no judgment, it's just that they're large.
Oh, yeah, for sure, right?
So I just plugged in a 1% and you're still at about 2.73. So it would be less than a 1% increase to get to the 2%.
For the Board of Ed and the town.
Correct.
And this isn't only on the discretionary piece, right? This includes the fact that teacher salaries are gonna go up by 4 or something, so that would mean that their discretionary piece would have to drop, or how should I think about that?
Well, that's a really good question. I could tell you the salaries on the overall budget for the Board of Ed alone are probably going to be over 2 alone. So, I mean, essentially they get nothing discretionary.
Basically a flat budget on discretionary spending roughly.
Yeah.
I'll put quotes around discretionary because nothing's purely discretionary.
Amy, does this include the debt service plan that we had talked
Yes.
about?
This is the updated plan.
Can you go to the debt service graph and sort of walk us through the assumptions in there? What were you assuming in terms of budgetary growth, 3%?
Let me see. Yes, 3%.
For 2025, we have not yet gone out to bid. We'll do that in the spring, right?
Right.
We do have a large capital reserves. What if we paid cash and didn't bond for 3 or 4 million? Would that help anything?
Let me see. So if I did 3 million on the 25 issuance.
Do you think we have flexibility for 3 million?
Well, we don't yet. That's a great question. Amy's working
I
on
do not
getting
know
us
yet.
the available capital
Okay.
reserves, because we're gonna
Just
have
curious,
to.
yeah. Okay.
Next month, we'll do an assignment of 2.3 million planned use of capital reserves. That's gone. If there is a purchase of something, that's gone.
So at
So that number will quickly
Right.
is gonna be more in the 2 to 3,
Got
not
it, but just
not-
hypothetically, I guess, yeah.
yeah.
So at 3 million, it reduces our debt service, and then our budget is 0.85% increase, and you're still slightly over that 2 at a 2.2 million.
But that's still at the 1%? So, I mean, it helps some. Is it worth doing it? I don't know. But one of the things we'll be looking at is how best to use those capital reserves and whether that can give any relief. Unfortunately, we've already used the capital reserves to get the debt service relief. One thing to do, I know Mark is working on that in the out years, is to get those capital bonded projects lower so that we aren't increasing debt service, so that we can work our way out of that. Can you talk about the cliff? So we're lowering debt service, we're not creating a cliff because we're bonding less and it's gonna start leveling out. But it's still gonna go up a little bit, so we may need to level it out flat.
Yeah, so there's still a discretionary portion where we allowed 10 million in bonding over 2 years. And then to make it progressively go up incrementally in smaller amounts, so it's kind of smoothing up, we used our reserves to create that smoothing. If we decreased it further, then, I mean, obviously either less reserves would have to be used or greater tax relief. But the way that we did it is that we used our last set of reserves in fiscal year 28, so that by the time we get to fiscal year 29, there's no cliff because there's just a decent increase. It goes from 8.4 basically to 8.4, 14,000 under this scenario. So we're not creating a cliff by utilizing the reserves, we're just smoothing it so it's not hitting any spikes.
We may want to in 28, 29, and 30 get our borrowing down and keep it flat at 8 until we get some grandless growth instead of inching it up, because every 500,000, that's a lot of money. It's almost 3/4 of a Board of Selectmen increase right there, and if we can just keep that flat, which might mean bonding less. When interest rates are high, it's not a bad thing to bond less. Interest rates are gonna come down, so it's, we can think about that pause anyway. You borrow when rates are low, not when they're high. But that's one of the things, so, if for November, we could get how much we think of capital reserves is actually usable after all the assignments, we're gonna do the transfers. That's one of the reasons Amy's gonna look into whether we can release some of the assigned dollars for healthcare, because that will give us a little bit more money to use as well. Amy did send us the calendar. It does not list the tri-board, so we need to pick a date for the tri-board. The Board of Education is doing an open house for Latimer on the date of our next meeting at 5:30. So one thing I had is, do we wanna start our meeting at 6:30 so we can go to the open house? People are comfortable with that. Does that work, switching our meeting time? Amy, would that work for you? Okay. And then because of that, can we try and schedule the tri-board, I guess, for December? Or can you coordinate with the 3 boards and see if there's a date? A regular meeting in December doesn't work, if there's another date that works for everyone. We'll plan on doing that, and that'll give us some time to clean up the letter and get the use of capital reserves that are gonna be available. But I imagine our guidance is gonna be hard, but it might include this year the use of capital reserves. We may need it for it's usually the only lever we have. I'm not sure how much of a lever we have because we used it all last year. But that's why, again, thank you to Mark and Wendy for prioritizing capital. We'll fund as much as we can, but if we can't, we'll know. We won't have to have multiple meetings, we'll just drop off the bottom. And then Amy, if we'll have we'll be able to finalize the letter for November, I think, so we can get it out before the December tri-board. Those numbers will come in. I don't know if you've had a chance, Amy, to confirm with our auditor to try and get that, make sure that that's done January and February and not in March, whatever happens.
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't checked their schedules, they won't check them until it's in final review. But yeah, we should be good to go on that.
Okay, and fiducian in February, just wanna keep those all out of the budget process. We'll get the estimates for the health and the ARC, we're still waiting on those did not come in.
They committed to the November meeting date, so we'll have those in
Okay,
November.
so that's perfect. Those are some of our big numbers, so we'll have those under it. And then we're waiting on the final pension valuation reports, those are coming out, we think in October, the end of the month, we're not sure.
I hope so.
Okay.
As long as they don't
hopeful
interfere with my audit.
Right. I think that's all I had. What are people's thoughts? I mean, you've seen some stark numbers, it's less hopeful than we were hoping.
I mean, I think we're doing the right math. I mean, we've committed that we wanna stay close to COLA. Unfortunately, I mean, it stinks that the grand list isn't growing, right? But I don't think we then go back to people and say, sorry, this isn't growing, you're now gonna go up by 4% on your taxes, right? So I think we're starting in the right spot. I think similar to last year, I like that we're already starting to be creative with what our resources are. I think it's good for everybody to hear it up front.
Else have comments?
I think everybody's gotta be creative this year, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a year when you say, can we use our resources internally? Do we need to use contractors? Do we need to do professional development out of state? Can we do it in state? Can we use the expertise in
And do we have programs that we can do without?
zero-based budgeting? Yeah.
We're coming on the back of 2 years of large increase. I mean, that's the background of it, and that cannot become a pattern.
I mean, the good news is Mark, your budget came in with almost 2 million in savings. That tells us there's a lot of contingencies, so you will have some flexibility to come in with a lower percentage increase.
That's the good news.
That is the good news.
But we don't have the Board of Education here. That's where most of the money is going.
And but to Mike's point, I think 85% of that is salary. So they can reduce the number of employees, but they have no flexibility on the salary.
Right, but that's why it's so important that this year we see the budget presented by program and not a single line item of employee salary, so we can really evaluate whether that's necessary.
And this plan right now accounts for a 5 million year-over-year CIP plan. Sooner or later, the BOE comes at us with a very large project again.
Yeah.
Maybe we're on this board at that time, but maybe some of us will still be here, maybe some of us won't. But that's gonna be a huge challenge for future boards if these trends keep playing out.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the best thing we could do is all of us march down to the State House with protest signs and say fund education.
Is there anything, this isn't a fully fleshed out thought, but we're entering into a charter revision. Is there anything in the charter that prevents us as the Board of Finance from coming up with different kinds of creative solutions facing these kind of numbers? I have no suggestions. I just know that if there are things that we say, well, we can't do this because it's in the charter, I mean, this is the time to kind of think about that and tell people. Like I said, I have no personal suggestions, but this doesn't look promising over the next 5 years. So if there's something like that, we should think about that sooner rather than later.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, I was just talking with someone at the coffee shop and she said, I just love Simsbury, but it's getting hard for me to afford it. And I'm willing to pay a little more to live here, but I'm reaching the point where I can't. And that's someone who's been here for 30 years. You don't want to hear that. So that's the question. It will become we know from that letter that I put together, some of our people in Simsbury can afford this, but 20%, 1 out of 5 of us cannot. So the question is, who are we budgeting for and how are we gonna manage this transition? Congratulations to the Board of Selectmen though for doing some senior citizen tax relief, because that helps our most needy, so we are grateful for that. But I think communication, we should all consider doing a tri-board Brace for Impact letter explaining the situation, because this is, I'm not seeing a path forward.
I'm sorry, you said,
In 2017, when Governor Malloy proposed the 4 million tax on towns, we did a tri-board letter and we blasted everyone and said, this is coming. We're gonna do our best to get through it, but we wanna make you aware early that we don't have any control over this. This is coming. We have a bunch of unfunded mandates from the state, the motor vehicle reimbursement, the veterans, all good stuff. You can say great policy, but they're charging it to the property tax instead of the income tax, regressive tax. It makes no sense. They aren't reimbursing for special education, makes no sense. It's bad public policy. So these are things that are happening. And the cap on the motor vehicle, this is less income that's coming in. We're not getting municipal revenue sharing grant now, so we need to start quantifying the state tax on municipal government, the decision by the state to transfer some of the costs to municipalities. We'll do our best to control, but I think to your point, Art, and I don't remember who said it, this is a year of we don't want to see any trips to Hawaii. We want to see bare bones, everybody pulling. And I know that staff wouldn't take a trip to Hawaii, but you sort of get, it's a year of, this is not the year to do this. This is a year to keep the lights on, the doors open, and do our core responsibilities. Right. So, but we do have the 24,000, so we are saving up. Okay, so minutes.
We'll put that in the letter.
Yeah, we'll put that in the letter.
Absolutely.
We do have one positive.
On the other hand.
Irma started us off right.
For the minutes, I just had two changes, just a quick change, differing to deferring in the second paragraph, and add the word about. Ms. Hefner spoke about assumptions instead of spoke assumptions. With that, may I have a motion to move into executive session?
Do we need to approve the minutes?
Yeah.
I move to approve the minutes.
With
Second it.
amended?
both sets.
As amended.
Yeah, I attended one and couldn't make the second, so I will vote to
Okay.
approve the first and abstain on the second.
Fair, I'm in the same situation.
Okay, we'll give Todd the second. Did you second it?
I'll second, yes. I second.
Okay. So we have, everyone approved except Art abstained on the
Second one,
second meeting.
September 20.
I abstained also on
And
second.
Mike on this, okay. So we are good on that, and then can we have a motion pursuant to General Statute Section 1206D, sale or purchase of real property, to go enter into executive session
So moved.
Included in executive session will be the town manager and the finance director. Is anyone else coming into executive session? Okay.